Good evening, everyone, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Tonight's story is called Swimming Lessons. A couple of girlfriends and I lived off campus while attending the University of Florida. We were finishing our junior year and wanted a vacation before starting our summer jobs. We loved the water, but visited the beach countless times and wanted a fresh experience. Tina suggested renting a cottage on the St. Johns River, so Lisa got online to look for options. She came across a cute 2-bedroom, including all the amenities, for a reasonable weekly rate. The place sat 50 feet from the water and offered a beautiful deck, barbecue, fire pit, dock, fishing equipment, and dinghy. The cottage was available the week we wanted, so we snapped it up. Booking online made things easy. The owner would leave us the keys to the house in a digital lockbox and text us the code the morning we were to arrive. If we had any trouble, all we need do was call him. He was a 5-minute motorboat ride down the river. We arrived Saturday morning to find everything as advertised. The beds were comfy, the air conditioning worked, and the barbecue tank was full. We stuffed the refrigerator with a week's worth of fixings and coolers as we stopped at a grocery store before arriving. The water looked scrumptious, but we preferred to eat meals, not become one. Florida waterways were home to several dangerous species, including alligators. The afternoon sun scorched the deck as we enjoyed a frosty beverage while sunbathing. Our neighbors, 3 senior swimmers from FSU, Rick, Sam, and Theo, invited themselves and their cooler over around dinner time. We hesitated to host them at first, but the promise of cooking a gourmet meal was too tempting to refuse. It didn't hurt that they were cute, toned, and charming either. The boys made good on their promise, serving a delicious Caesar salad, medium-rare steaks cooked to perfection, and cheese-stuffed baked potatoes that added an inch to our thighs. Not wanting to appear as 3 spoiled princesses, Tina and Lisa served a phenomenal fruit salad for dessert, and I played DJ the entire evening. I'm a half-hearted vegetarian and was reluctant to sample the steaks. However, I gave in to the peer pressure, my inhibition lowered by a couple coolers, and used my serrated knife to hack off a hunk of the tender meat. Everyone took great satisfaction in corrupting my palate and cheered as I punctured the chuck with each bite. The coup de grace was the streams of bloody juices pooling under my potato, soaking its soft flesh, an unintended but delectable consequence. We were too many drinks deep by 10 o'clock. The boys began competing for our attention, their boisterous and boastful bravado wading into the abyss of stupidity. It was amusing at first, but soon became disturbing. Rick and Sam began teasing Theo that he had failed to beat them in a race the entire swimming season. He got angry at their repeated barbs and challenged them to a race across the river. We girls kiboshed the idea, reminding them that alligators frequented the St. Johns. Drunk and undaunted, Theo threw down the gauntlet a second time. His inebriated equal, Rick, accepted. Sam had enough sense to decline, thank God. I objected again, warning about the alligators. Theo explained he had night fished with his father in the waters around the cottage since he was a kid and had never seen a single alligator. Rick further rationalized that all recorded gator attacks occurred further south. We agreed on a compromise. Theo and Rick would swim across the river, but 2 others would use the dinghy to escort them. One person would row while the other used a flashlight to look for predators. They could pull the 2 combatants into the dinghy if they encountered any. All 4 would return in the dinghy after the race. The guys were serious about obtaining future bragging rights and changed into their competitive swimming trunks. Theo's trunks were white, while Rick's were blue. Both pairs were so revealing, I couldn't help but blush. Sam and I volunteered to operate the small boat since Tina and Lisa couldn't walk straight, let alone stand. Sam was much stronger than me, so he rowed while I stood watch. We took the boat out 50 feet and made sure the water's edge was clear before Theo and Rick dove in. It surprised me how fast they could swim. I worried Sam would not keep ahead of them. Sure enough, at the midway point, Theo and Rick overtook us. I shined the light ahead of them, but it mattered little, as they could swim into trouble with no way for us to warn them. Rick stopped swimming and began screaming. I put the light on him, terrified of what I would see. "What's wrong?" asked Sam. "What's happening?" "Just keep rowing," I said. Rick had vanished when the dinghy arrived to the spot I last saw him. Sam and I leaned over the boat's side, tipping it as I shined the light into the water. Its murky depths refused to give up any information about Rick. We screamed his name, hoping for a reply. Theo reached the river's bank in the meantime. Unaware that Rick had encountered trouble, he celebrated the shallow victory by hooting and howling. Theo quieted down as silence consumed the river. Sam and I held our breaths and waited. Rick burst from the water screaming and latched onto the boat. I dropped the flashlight into the water as Sam and I grabbed onto Rick and attempted to pull him in. "Are you okay?" asked Sam. "Yeah, it's a bad cramp," said Rick. "There's no alligator?" I said. "No, now get me out of here before there is." We pulled him into the boat halfway, but our weights combined to tip it too far. It capsized, sending the three of us into the river. Rick and Sam attempted to flip the boat several times. I doggy paddled, trying my best to keep my head above the water. I could feel slick strands of seaweed stroke my near-naked body. The feeling was alien, painting a mental image of the sidewinding slither of snakes or the half-submerged slink of an alligator. Something made a tremendous splash at the opposing bank. Sam yelled, "That was a gator! We gotta turn this thing over!" The thought of the river monster grabbing hold of my legs and pulling me to the bottom to tear me apart was too much to bear. I began screaming for the guys to right the boat. Rick and Sam turned the dinghy over but took their time climbing aboard to avoid capsizing it again. I waited, each second turning into an hour, knowing that certain death was swimming towards me. They each grabbed an arm and lifted straight up. My ragdoll body slipped from their grasp and fell back into the water. Several long lines of seaweed ensnared me. I felt the wake of something moving past me and died 1,000 deaths in a single moment. I ripped the weeds from my body and re-emerged from the river. The boys grabbed hold of my arms again, this time falling back into the boat, pulling me in. I could only imagine the abrasions covering my skin after being dragged over the boat's wooden side. Something large skimmed the side of the boat before swimming off downriver. As we caught our breaths and calmed down, the owner of the cottage rode up in his motorboat. Tina and Lisa had called him after they heard the commotion. We all got into his boat as he tied the dinghy to its starboard. We then proceeded to the other side of the river to retrieve Theo. The owner shined a spotlight on the bank so we could locate the newly crowned swimming king. The water's edge came into view once we were 10 feet from shore. Floating in the water were a pair of white swimming trunks, blood-soaked and torn apart.